A woman's suicide raised questions about why she did it. Was it depression, anger, revenge? Until a forensic pathologist questioned whether it was a suicide at all. Her dream was to marry a successful man, have children, live comfortably, and have lots of friends. 33-year-old Jennifer Corbin got all that and more when she married Dr. Bart Corbin.
They had a houseboat, they had nice cars, and a coveted type career of dentist. You know, a lot of folks want to be a doctor or lawyer, and they had all that.
But after 7 years of marriage and 2 children, the couple also had serious problems in their relationship.
I had no idea that it was going to be that bad. But it had gotten pretty bad the last month.
That's when Bart discovered something while he was sitting in Jennifer's car at a gas station. In her purse was an email from a love interest named Chris.
Know that you are in my heart always, that I love you like I haven't another, that I love the friendship and honesty I have with you.
He became upset and confronted her about it. And while they were driving home in the car from Jennifer's parents' house on Thanksgiving, the argument got to the point where Bart allegedly struck Jennifer in the face.
Apparently, that was the final straw. Their marriage was effectively over.
There were plans being made outside of the marriage. She was going to end her marriage. She was going to leave Bart.
Amid rumors, Bart Corbin was also having an affair with one of his dental assistants. The Corbins separated and filed for divorce. And then something terrible happened. On December 4th, 2004, the Corbins' 7-year-old son found his mother dead of an apparent suicide. A .38 caliber pistol was at her side.
When I woke up this morning, I went to go see my mom if I could have breakfast, and then I saw a gun right by her, and there was blood right here.
Okay.
There was no suicide note, but her divorce papers were underneath her body.
It could have been that she had been served or found out about the divorce filing and was so emotionally distraught that that was the outcome, that she had shot herself. It looked like a lot of indicators that were consistent with suicide.
It wasn't completely outside the realm of possibility that a woman who was facing the loss of her children because of an online affair could have been afraid that she was going to lose custody of her sons, lose her home, lose everything.
Bart Corbin had an alibi for the night of Jennifer's death. He was out with friends at a bar, a half-hour's drive away.
Credit card statement showed about 14 beers had been bought between 3 guys that were there at Wild Wings.
From there, Bart drove one of his friends home, then spent the night at his brother's house. Bart's brother confirmed that. In retracing Jennifer's activities that night, investigators learned that she was on the phone and computer with Chris, her internet friend.
And that's corroborated by the telephone records. She was probably on the phone till right at 1:30 in the morning.
Then police learned about an email exchange between Jennifer and her internet love interest, Chris, that was eerily similar to Jennifer's death.
Jennifer, would you take a revolver and load 1 bullet into it? Place it to my forehead and pull the trigger as we have sex? Do you have that in you, Jennifer?
Investigators now began to suspect there was more to Jennifer's death than it first appeared.
And then I saw a gun right by her, and there was blood right here. And then she wouldn't wake up, and I thought she was sleeping.
It's standard for an autopsy to be performed in suspected suicide cases. Dr. Carol Terry makes no assumptions about the case until she looks at all of the evidence.
I said, whatever you have pertaining to this case, I want to see before I make a ruling. Realizing once I say something, this is going to be a bell that can't be unrung.
Dr. Terry noticed that the angle of Jennifer's head wound was unusual for a suicide. The entrance wound was in the back of her head, behind her right ear.
An atypical wound path in that it traveled from the back, traveling toward the front. These features were not inconsistent with a suicide. They were atypical.
But the location of the gun was inconsistent with her body position.
There's no way to explain that gun traveling from back here to a position down around her waist, tucked in an area of the comforter.
And there was no blood spatter on Jennifer's hands, a virtual impossibility if she'd shot herself. There was no gunpowder residue either. When the gun was test-fired, it created a significant amount of residue.
Had she shot herself, you would have expected her hand wipings to have been positive as well.
Jennifer's death was officially ruled a homicide. But who had a motive to kill Jennifer? A year before her death, as her marriage was crumbling, Jennifer Corbin spent a lot of time on the internet. And that's how she met Chris, who lived in St. Joseph, Missouri, 800 miles away.
They began initially talking in the chat rooms, but then moved to regular email and began to conduct an online or develop an online relationship.
Soon, their friendship became something more serious.
I love you. I love the friendship and honesty I have with you.
It's clearly something that someone does to sort of step outside of the real world. I'm not really good at the psychology of it, but it clearly she was using it as a diversion from her real life.
Phone records confirmed that Chris was in St. Joseph, Missouri, 800 miles away on the night of Jennifer's murder, and was eliminated as a suspect. Jennifer's estranged husband, Bart, also had an alibi. He was out with friends, and his credit card receipts proved it. Then spent the night at his brother's house a half-hour's drive away. Then Jennifer's friends told police a shocking piece of information. Bart Corbin's girlfriend in dental school, Dolly Hearn, was also found dead in her apartment with a .38 caliber weapon by her side.
And this pathologist, basically says that this is suicide, is consistent with suicide. The forensics are consistent with suicide.
I knew the minute I heard coroner's voice when he said that Dolly had shot herself, I said, she did not.
Dolly's parents said the death occurred just after she tried to break up with Bart Corbin. They also claimed Bart Corbin stalked and harassed her.
He broke into the apartment at one point and actually stole Dolly's cat, Tabitha. She had tires slashed, windows broken, all kinds of things.
Corbin also put air spray in Dolly's contact lens cases and sabotaged her classwork for dental school. The Hearn family asked Corbin to end the harassment of their daughter, and Corbin agreed. Just a few months later, Dolly was dead.
I have never understood why they didn't pursue it a little more diligently. They had just made up their mind that it was a suicide, and they just couldn't seem to look any farther than that.
What were the chances that Bart Corbin's two love interests would die the same way with the same caliber weapon.
We had somebody who was either just so terribly unlucky to have his wife in 2004 commit suicide and his girlfriend commit suicide years ago, or we had somebody who was committing murders.
Dolly Hearn and Jennifer Corbin had never met, but they had one thing in common. They both tried to end relationships with Bart Corbin. When Jennifer Corbin's death was ruled a homicide, investigators in Augusta, Georgia, reopened Dolly Hearn's case. Dolly's death was first investigated 14 years earlier when there was no trained blood spatter expert on the police staff. Now they had one, Dwayne Piper.
There were so many red flags that jumped out at me initially that suicide wasn't really even conceivable in this case.
Dolly was found sitting cross-legged on her couch, her head slumped over her left side. The gun had been in her right hand, although when this picture was taken, paramedics had already removed it. The entrance wound was on the right side of her head, but strangely, there was no blood on her right hand.
She couldn't have been holding a gun. There was no backspatter on the exposed parts of her hand, which would have had impact stains on them from backspatter.
This proved that Dolly's arm was by her side when the shot took place. And Piper noticed that the blood on her left thigh was not blood spatter caused by a gunshot.
Those were transfer stains that were put there immediately with fresh blood. So that was a blood stain transfer that was placed there by somebody with a bloody hand, bloody arm, or bloody object that transferred that stain onto the leg.
Dolly Hearn was killed with her own .38 caliber pistol, one she kept in her apartment for protection.
This was a homicide. She didn't shoot herself. I don't care who says that she was the only one there. It's impossible.
Now Dr. Bart Corbin found himself facing not one, but 2 counts of first-degree murder. But investigators still had to refute Corbin's alibi for the night of his wife Jennifer's murder. He claimed he left the bar shortly after 1 a.m., then went to his brother Bobby's house to spend the night. But Bart's cell phone records show he made a call at 1:58 a.m., showing Bart's location was somewhere else.
We found out what cell phone tower he hit, which was very close to his house, which was contrary to where he says he was through his friends and brothers.
And who did Corbin call? Phone records show he called his marriage counselor's answering service to cancel the appointment he and Jennifer had for the next day.
I can just imagine him sitting in the driveway, contemplating killing his wife, and calling the marriage counselor to cancel the appointment, knowing that he won't need it because he's about to walk into the house and kill his wife. That's the scenario that I think is most likely.
Bart's alibi fell completely apart when his neighbor heard Bart pull into his driveway around 1:45 in the morning.
Before I shut the garage door down, I heard a truck pull up, and it was Bart pulling in the driveway. I just know it was him because I've heard that truck several times before.
But police wanted to know where Corbin got the .38 caliber pistol he used to kill his wife. They learned that it was purchased by a man in Birmingham, Alabama named Richard Wilson. Interestingly, Richard Wilson and Bart Corbin knew each other.
Richard Wilson was a guy who worked for Barton Corbin's father. The father had hired him out of college. He was a salesman for the father's company.
When interviewed, Wilson denied ever owning a .38 caliber pistol and denied any recent contact with Corbin. But police found evidence that Bart Corbin called Wilson on his cell phone shortly before Jennifer's murder. Now facing prosecution himself as an accessory to murder, Wilson decided to cooperate in exchange for immunity.
He said that he thought his wife was fooling around on him. He thought he needed a gun to protect himself. And he knew I had guns. Asked me if I had one, and I had gotten one a while back, traded it for a used lawnmower. I just told him he could have it. So he came down here and got it.
Finding the gun and the origin of the gun is what closed the deal. It's what compelled Bart Corbin to plea.
And then, Corbin learned the shocking truth about Jennifer's internet friend, Chris. It was the last thing he would have suspected. Prosecutors believe that Bart Corbin was incapable of handling rejection from women.
We found many women that he ended the relationship with, and he's comfortable with that. But he can't take it when a woman ends the relationship. And I think that's the motivation for all of this.
When Corbin was in dental school, he met and dated a vivacious 27-year-old fellow student, Dolly Hearn. They dated for about a year, until Dolly decided to end their relationship, which Corbin couldn't accept. The evidence shows he stalked her, intimidated her, and even sabotaged some of the coursework she needed to graduate. When this didn't work, prosecutors believe Corbin went to Dolly's apartment on a social visit. He may have asked to use the bathroom, which gave him the opportunity to take Dolly's gun that she kept under her bed for protection. Then he shot her with it. The blood shows he moved her body to make it look like a suicide. 14 years later, when his wife Jennifer wanted a divorce, he tried it again. On the night of the murder, Bart established an alibi by going out drinking with friends. Jennifer was on the phone and computer with her friend Chris until 1:30. Bart arrived close to 2 a.m. and called his marriage counselor's answering service to cancel their appointment for the next day. Then he barged into the bedroom while Jennifer was watching television and killed her. He moved her body to look like a suicide, but he placed the gun in the wrong location, and there was no blood or gunpowder residue on her hand. Before leaving, he put a copy of their divorce papers under Jennifer's body to provide possible motive for the suicide. Then he drove to his brother's house to sleep overnight. Jennifer's murder and all the mistakes were the same ones he made when he murdered Dolly Hearn 14 years earlier.
Until he killed Jennifer Corbin, Barton Corbin had gotten away with the murder of Dolly Hearn. So why not repeat the pattern that succeeds?
The circumstances were the same. Both Jennifer Corbin and Dolly Hearn were through with Bart Corbin. They wanted to end the relationship. They were turning their back on him.
We see it all the time. I mean, killers or criminals will oftentimes repeat a pattern that they think works until it doesn't work anymore, and that's usually when we catch them.
It must have been a surprise when Bart learned the truth about Jennifer's internet friend, Chris. The two had never met in person. They knew one another only through emails and telephone calls. And Corbin also didn't know that Chris was a woman.
It says how desolate her life was that she was willing to grasp at any straw to have some companionship. Did you, in fact, commit the offense of malice murder, to which you are now pleading guilty as it is outlined in the indictment?
Yes.
In order to avoid a death sentence, Bart Corbin pled guilty to the murders of both Jennifer and Dolly Hearn. He was convicted and is serving concurrent life sentences.
I'm just glad that he admitted it, and I'm glad that it settles the question once and for all. That's what's important to us. It's not up to us. Vengeance is not up to us. The Lord will take care of that.
Art Corbin had gotten away with murder once, but by 2004, forensic science made sure he wouldn't do it again.
It's so unfortunate someone else had to die for this case to be brought back to life.
He might be smarter than some of us as individuals. Collectively, as our science and forensics has evolved, he's not smarter than all that.
If the forensics hadn't advanced from 1990, Jennifer's death would have gone into the same file as Dolly Hearn's did for 14 years. We would have never solved it.
A woman was ambushed in her own driveway. Eyewitness accounts differed, but a handwriting expert found evidence that she had a secret admirer with a not-so-secret motive. In the 19th century, Manchester, Connecticut was the silk capital of the world. Today, the mills are apartments, and the town is enjoying growth and new investment.
So I believe population's around 58,000 people. We have a large retail center in the north section of town, which draws a lot of people into that area.
Manchester was home for Gail and Doug Islib, who had been married for a little over 3 years. They both had grown children from previous marriages.
She was Grammy to anybody. Her grandchildren were her whole world. Even my cousins who have children, they were her grandchildren. We were a very close family, very connected.
But in the spring of 1996, Gail's family noticed that she was behaving suspiciously.
And I said something to her about it. I said, "Mom, what are you doing hanging blankets from the windows?" And her response to me was, "Well, you never know who could be out there looking in your windows."
On another occasion, Gail had refused to let her daughter drive her car.
She parked behind me and I said, "Mom, where are your keys?" And she refused to let me take her car. She's like, "Oh, no, just move my car. I don't have enough gas." And she made up one excuse after another.
Even a simple phone call set Gail on edge.
You could tell when the phone rang, she was nervous about it, about who it might be on the other end.
I think that she felt like she was protecting us by not exposing us to any danger that might be around.
On April 30th, 1996, Gail ended her shift at the Walmart store around 10 p.m., then drove home. Her husband, Doug, said he heard Gail pull into their driveway. Then he heard a commotion. He went outside and saw a gunman standing next to her car. He ran to call police.
Sister emergency. There's a robbery here. I think somebody shot at my wife. I just saw somebody there with a mask.
When police arrived, they discovered Gail Islib had been shot multiple times in the head and was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators found 7 .22 caliber shell casings scattered around Gail's car.
It was very close and personal, and there was some indication that several of the wounds were close contact type of wounds.
And police noticed that Gail's husband, Doug, was holding a .22 caliber revolver, the same caliber weapon used in his wife's murder.
Well, naturally, we have a shooting. He's at the scene with a gun. Well, that's gonna be the first place you're gonna, consider something.
Doug claimed he grabbed his gun for protection after he called 911. Police asked Doug to describe the man he saw kill his wife.
He thought that the subject that he saw in his driveway was a Hispanic male, light-skinned male.
But this contradicted his 911 call to police.
I just saw somebody there with a mask.
He also mentioned robbery, but Gail's purse and jewelry were still in her car. Two neighbors corroborated parts of Doug's story. They heard the gunshots and the sound of a car speeding away.
Very shocking, especially in this neighborhood.
Another witness saw a white car leaving the scene. However, the one thing everyone agreed on was that Gail Islib had no known enemies.
You'd never think, geez, somebody must be stalking my mother. I mean, it just never would come to your mind.
The first thought in my mind was, how the heck are we going to solve this thing? Because we really, at the beginning, had nothing.
When police arrived at the scene of Gail Islib's murder, her husband Doug was holding a .22 caliber pistol, the same caliber weapon used in her murder. But the gun was fully loaded, and this model did not discharge its spent shell casings like the weapon used in the murder, so Doug was eliminated as a suspect.
There was no rhyme or reason to it. The Islib seemed to be a husband and wife who were just minding their business, living their lives. Gail was a devoted mother, it's pretty obvious. She was a devoted grandmother.
The assailant fired 7 shots at close range. 5 of them struck Gail Islib in the head.
One of the things that we looked at was the possibility that maybe perhaps this was a road rage type of incident. Or maybe she cut someone off on her way home and, person wound up driving and taking some shots at her.
Family members and friends told investigators that Gail Islib had no known enemies, so they began their investigation by talking to Gail's co-workers.
This is a group of crackerjack investigators. Paul Lombardo went to Walmart the next morning, 7 o'clock when the store opened up, and he started interviewing co-workers.
Gail worked in the shoe department and told co-workers that a fellow employee had been bothering her.
I think some of the words that the employees used were that this person was infatuated with Mrs. Islib and would, just constantly be talking to her and harassing her.
The employee was 25-year-old Tyrone Montgomery. He was half of Gail's age, yet that didn't seem to deter him.
Montgomery would come in on his days off and hang around the shoe department and follow Gail around when Gail was working. It became obvious that he was drawn to her. And his feelings were unrequited.
When police entered Montgomery's home, he wasn't there. But they noticed a white car like the one described by witnesses. It was registered to Montgomery's stepfather. Inside, in the ashtray, police found the remains of a partially burned note and several pages of intact notes.
Dogs. Bring mace and duct tape to tie up dog's mouth. Come up with excuse. I'm returning her cake dish. Wipe down all weapons. Get ice pick from grocery store. Get him subdued, then stick ice pick through his ear.
It looked like a criminal checklist. But why did it mention using an ice pick to kill a man? Was it possible that the intended target was Gail's husband?
At this point, we had no way of talking to him about that. So we had to find other means of tying these notes into Tyrone.
So they sent the note to forensic document examiner Jim Streeter, along with known handwriting samples from Tyrone Montgomery's employment application.
There were numerous individual handwriting characteristics and habits that I observed. We had the use of almost a cursive J in this print-style writing, and often it almost resembled a letter L, a cursive letter L. That was one letter. There was a consistent use of an entry stroke appearing to the left of the perpendicular in a lowercase e. that was consistent throughout the writings of both the question and the known.
Streeter concluded that Tyrone Montgomery had written the checklist. But where was he? Investigators learned that he checked himself into a local psychiatric hospital shortly after Gail Islib's murder.
Apparently, he had made the comment at the hospital that a friend of his had just died and he was feeling suicidal.
Or was this a ruse so he wouldn't have to speak with police?
Affected by one violent act like this. And this happened to take, the center of our world. She was the center of our family.
The prime suspect in Gail Islib's murder was her co-worker, 25-year-old Tyrone Montgomery.
Tyrone Montgomery apparently worked in the department right next to Mrs. Islib. He didn't have any kind of criminal record, but he was one of those employees that the other people in the store talked about as being a little different or a little out of the ordinary.
According to co-workers, Montgomery asked Gail Islib several times to go out with him. When she refused, he exhibited bizarre behavior.
He apparently either got a ride from her or gave her a ride somewhere, pulled out a BB gun and said, "See how easy it would be to hijack you," and stuck the gun in her ribs, words to that effect.
He was young, 25. My mother was 54. She had a family, married, grown kids older than him. What do you think is going to become of all that?
Gail never filed an official complaint, although co-workers say there were numerous incidents.
There were several occasions where Tyrone asked her out to dinner and she refused. One person indicated that they saw Tyrone put his arm around her back and she pushed his arm away.
It was obvious that he had, at this point, was living some type of fantasy and believing that she was gonna, go off with him.
No one knows why Gail kept quiet and tried to handle the situation on her own.
I'm really sorry that I couldn't help her with that, and that she felt she had to deal with it on her own. Because I know if that was me, I would be terrified.
Not long after committing himself to the psychiatric hospital, Montgomery granted police a brief interview.
We asked him about whether or not he had killed Gail Islib, and his denials were very calm and quiet, actually. So that was kind of an interesting note.
Montgomery ended the interview quickly, so investigators asked the staff for the clothes he was wearing when he checked into the hospital.
Guess pursuant to hospital policy, they had laundered the clothing before it was handed over to the Manchester Police Department via search warrant.
So any analysis was worthless. But crime scene analyst Virginia Maxwell examined the one item the hospital didn't touch: Montgomery's boots.
And when I was examining those work boots, I found a cut in the sole in which there was a glass fragment lodged.
We knew that the suspect was probably standing just outside the driver's side window when the first shots were fired at Mrs. Islib, and there was a significant amount of glass on the ground around that area. And this would have indicated that there was some transfer of that glass onto his boots from the crime scene.
But as investigators well knew, there is automobile glass on virtually every city street. So Maxwell measured the refractive index of the sample. If you place a rod into a glass of water, it appears that the rod is bent.
And that's not because the glass rod is actually bent, it's simply because the speed of light in water is different to the speed of light in air. Therefore, our eye perceives that the glass rod is bent.
The extent to which the light changes is known as the refractive index. Maxwell crushed both the glass from Montgomery's boot and the glass from Gail's car. Then placed the samples on separate slides with silicone oil and heated them. When the oil reaches the same refractive index as the glass. The shards seemed to disappear. This proved the refractive index of the glass in Gale's car and on Montgomery's boot was the same.
But when we do testing with refractive indices, the best we can say is that that known sample could have been the source of that question sample.
So the evidence was consistent but not conclusive. Police had a suspect, but they still needed something to link him to Gale Islib's murder. With a warrant, investigators searched Tyrone Montgomery's home, looking for the .22 caliber weapon used in Gale Islib's murder, but they didn't find it. They did, however, find some interesting reading material.
We found some indications that he had purchased some books, books on how to be a hitman. And what they were these books on, quote-unquote, how to commit a murder. We began to find parallels to what he had written in his notes, some of the things he had done prior to the murder.
Montgomery owned another book entitled Methods of Disguise, a possible explanation for why Doug Islib gave conflicting information about the assailant.
It all began to kind of fit together that, the likelihood of him wearing makeup at the time was probably pretty good.
In the basement, investigators found a makeshift firing range. There were several .22 caliber rounds in the walls and spent shell casings on the floor. The bullets recovered from the wall were too damaged for comparison. But the casings on the floor were compared to the casings from the crime scene. Under a comparison microscope, firearms expert Ed Jakimowicz studied the marks on each casing.
Every time a cartridge was cycled through the action of that firearm, it produced that very detailed microscopic mark on every cartridge.
Surprisingly, the marks on the casings had a distinctive series of scratches under the rim. To ballistic experts, this was clear evidence that the gun was not properly assembled.
This particular model of firearm was a takedown, meaning that you could break it into two pieces and transport it from one place to another. And it just wasn't quite together properly. Whoever assembled this just didn't push the frame back into the barrel tight enough. So there was about a millimeter gap between the frame and the barrel.
The ballistics evidence clearly showed that the gun fired in Montgomery's basement was the same gun used to kill Gale Islib. Prosecutors believe that Montgomery was angry when Gale Islib refused his advances, so he hatched a plan to kill Gale's husband with an ice pick and kidnap Gale at gunpoint. On the night of the crime, he parked up the street, disguised his appearance, and waited for Gale to return from work. When Gale drove into her driveway, she saw Montgomery with the gun. Montgomery panicked and fired 7 shots into the car. As he fled, a tiny piece of glass was embedded in his boot. Handwritten notes in his car, the bullet casings in his basement, and the glass in his boot tied him definitively to the murder.
You're finding pieces here and there, and you're starting to fit these pieces together, and that's a really big piece.
Tyrone Montgomery was arrested and charged with felony murder. Although police didn't need information on how he got the weapon, they wanted it. So they questioned, once again, the manager of the gun department at Montgomery's store. And this time, the manager admitted Montgomery bought a .22 caliber rifle shortly before Gale Islib's murder. Montgomery told him he wanted it for hunting.
I don't think you're going to drop a moose or a deer with a .22 caliber rifle. You might take down a squirrel, you might take down a rabbit, you might take down a pheasant if you're a very good shot, but you're not going to take out any kind of animals, game animals in this part of the country with a .22 caliber rifle.
When the manager learned Gail Islib was killed with a .22 caliber weapon, he panicked and changed the store's logbook.
What it would have done for Montgomery was it would have given him a gun that was untraceable because there would have been no record of that gun having been sold at that store.
Now that police had the serial number, they found the rifle in the possession of a local man who had bought it as a second-hand gun. Ballistic tests proved this was the murder weapon, and it had been assembled improperly.
Looking at the side or the circumference surface of the cartridge case, the most obvious mark in this particular case was that accidental mark left by that firearm not being properly assembled.
In October of 1997, Tyrone Montgomery was convicted of felony murder and sentenced to 65 years in prison. It's difficult to know why someone like Montgomery would believe a kidnapping plan like this would work. But the science spoke with certainty.
In certain aspects, he did a lot of planning. In certain aspects, his planning was pretty pathetic. His covering of his trail, I should say, was pretty pathetic.
This case probably was more of a team effort than I've really encountered in all the years I worked as a detective.
We were very lucky that they were able to preserve certain evidence and then do their testing and come back with some solid, concrete, undisputed facts that, just, I think, made it very easy for the prosecution to really get a good conviction.
Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here. To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In January 1993, 7 people were shot and killed inside a Brown's Chicken fast food restaurant in Chicago, becoming one of the deadliest mass shootings in the area at the time. For years, the case was cold with very few leads. It wasn't until evidence collected from a trash can at the crime scene was tested that investigators finally got a break. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 264, The Brown's Chicken Massacre. If you're from the state of Illinois, then chances are you've heard of Brown's Chicken. You might have even eaten at one of its fast food restaurants before. Or you might only know about it because of the 7 people who were killed inside a Brown's Chicken restaurant in Palatine, Illinois in January 1993. Either way, what happened that night will forever be remembered as the Brown's Chicken Massacre. For over 70 years, Brown's Chicken made a name for itself throughout Illinois. Founded in 1949 by John and Belva Brown, they first began selling fried chicken out of a small trailer in Bridgeview. Their vision for the company was simple: sell chicken that truly tastes better than anywhere else. And the original recipe was relatively simple as well: buttermilk batter and cottonseed oil. Over the years, different products made their way to the menu, but one thing never changed: that original buttermilk batter chicken recipe. By the 1970s, Brown's Chicken had expanded to 300 locations across 13 different states. And for the next few decades, business across all of its fast food restaurants was good, and the brand became an American success story. It had grown from a single family-owned restaurant in Bridgeview to a powerful restaurant chain. On its menu, you could find items like fried chicken, coleslaw, biscuits, and mashed potatoes. However, the business took a turn in the 2000s. In 2009, the Browns filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy after an alleged legal fight between the different owners. And by the following year, 2010, Pop Grip LLC purchased Brown's for a reported amount of $585,000. Fast forward to today. Brown's Chicken is still out there, but it's not the sizable fast food chain it once was. Today, there's only about 23 restaurants, all in the state of Illinois. But no matter the history, the different owners, the rotating menu items, Brown's Chicken will always be remembered for what happened right before closing time on January 8th, 1993. That cold winter night, while snow covered the ground, two men walked into the Brown's Chicken in Palatine, Chicago, just before its 9 o'clock closing time. Once inside the restaurant, the two men ordered a chicken meal from the menu before taking their seats at a booth. For anyone who might be watching, including the employees, they just looked like two average guys sitting down together to eat a late-night chicken dinner. Nothing seemed amiss. After finishing most of the meal, the men got up from the booth and threw away their trash in the nearby trash can. Napkins, chicken bones, cups. Then they put latex gloves over their hands, pulled out a gun and knives, and announced to the employees this was a robbery. The first employee to approach the robbers was Rico Solis, a 17-year-old kid sweeping the floors. Rico offered them some money, but one of them ordered him to get to the back of the restaurant while the other fired a shot into the ceiling and ordered all the other employees to get on the floor. Besides Rico Solis, those working that night were 50-year-old Richard Eilenfelt, his wife 49-year-old Lynn Eilenfelt, 46-year-old Guadalupe Maldonado, 16-year-old Michael Castro, 32-year-old Thomas Menace, and 31-year-old Marcus Nelson. Thomas tried to run by jumping over the counter, but one of the robbers shot him and dragged his body to one of the restaurant's two freezers, the one on the west side of the place. Also shot and dragged into the same freezer was the franchise owner, Richard Eilenfelt. After that, everyone else was ordered to get into the other freezer, the one on the east side. So in one freezer, there's Richard and Thomas, who were both already shot and killed, and in the other were Lynn, Guadalupe, Rico, Michael, and Marcus. After Richard and Thomas were killed, one of the robbers grabbed Lynn, the other franchise owner, and held her at knife point. He ordered her to take him where they had the safe with the money in it and demanded that she give him everything they had, which was about $1,800 to $1,900 in cash. After that, once the men had the cash and stuffed it into a canvas bag, they slit Lynn's throat with the knife and dragged her body into the other freezer where the rest of the employees were, the ones that were still alive. Now, later on, it would be discovered that the employees still alive begged the two robbers to spare their lives. They begged these men not to shoot them. They had family, they had friends, they had things they wanted to live for. But the robbers didn't listen. One by one, the men shot and killed all of the 4 remaining employees. Most of them were shot multiple times while huddled together inside the cold freezer. When all was said and done, 7 people were shot and killed, and the robbers got away with less than $2,000 in cash, becoming one of the worst mass murders in Chicago history. Later that night, the parents of 16-year-old Michael Castro got worried when he didn't return home from work, so they eventually decided to call the police. It wasn't like him not to come home when he was supposed to. Michael, like his friend and coworker Rico Solis, was a student at Palatine High School and worked part-time at Brown's Chicken. By the time Michael's parents called the police, they had already gone to the restaurant looking for him. And when they got there, they saw that his car was still parked in the parking lot, but they didn't see anyone inside. So about 6 hours after the 9 o'clock closing time, a couple of police officers pulled up to the restaurant to check on Michael and his coworkers. None of the other people working that night returned home either. And when the police got inside through an open employee door, that's when they saw a bloody mop just inside the doorway and called for backup. That particular Brown's Chicken restaurant was owned by husband and wife Richard and Lynn Eilenfelt from Arlington Heights. They both became victims inside the very business they owned to make a living. He'd been shot 5 times, while she'd been shot once and had her throat slit from ear to ear. Over 200 people would go on to attend their memorials, and everyone there described the couple as 2 family-oriented people who made time in their lives for religion, social activism, and business. Here's a direct quote from Gordon Sorensen. He was a close personal friend of Richard and Lynn, as well as a pastor who spoke at their funerals. Quote, "I will not let the injustice done to you keep me from remembering the justice you helped to create. I will not let the agonizing sadness of the news of your deaths keep me from remembering the wonder-filled joy of your living." End quote. No one deserves to be gunned down in their own business that they worked so hard to create, especially not these 2 people. Richard Ihlenfeld grew up in Columbus, where his family owned a business and was once mayor. His wife, Lynn, grew up about 75 miles north, and when they got married, they moved to Madison. Even though the town where Richard grew up in was small, most people either knew him or knew his father. So when they heard about the murders, everyone was shocked. No one could believe that something like this could happen to such nice people. Lynn and Richard left behind 3 daughters. 2 of them were even scheduled to be at the restaurant that night, but for some reason, some miracle, they weren't. Years later, their 3rd daughter, Jennifer, would become elected to the Wisconsin Senate. 46-year-old Guadalupe Maldonado had been shot a total of 3 times. Originally from Mexico, he had brought his family to the northwest suburbs of Chicago because he wanted a better future. In their eyes, the U.S. would give him and his children a better life, the American dream. Not long after arriving in the States, he started working at Brown's Chicken as a fry cook, and he took his job very seriously. He worked hard every single day and was well liked by all of his coworkers, especially Richard and Lynn, the owners. Just like Michael's parents, Guadalupe's wife became concerned when her husband still hadn't returned home that night by 1:30 in the morning. He was never known to stay out late with at least calling her first. So when he wasn't home by his usual 10 o'clock, she had a gut feeling that something was wrong. So the next morning, Guadalupe's wife, Juana, asked a friend of theirs if he would drive down to the restaurant to go check on him. But when the friend got there, he was reportedly told by a few officers not to worry and that Guadalupe was, quote, probably out drinking or hanging out. But the friend wasn't convinced by what the cop had apparently said, whether it was a joke or not. He knew Guadalupe. He wasn't a drinker. And he wasn't the kind of guy to go somewhere after work without telling his wife about it. So right away, both he and Juana knew that something was wrong. They didn't know what it was, but they were worried that something bad might have happened to him. 31-year-old Marcus Nelson was also killed that night. He was shot only once, but that's all it took. He was a former Navy cook who worked at Brown's and was often teased by his coworkers about the tattoo of a woman on one of his arms. On top of being shot, Marcus had also been hit over the head, which led the police to suspect that he tried to fight the robbers. After he left the Navy, he was said to be somewhat of a drifter who once called the local YMCA his home. But when he got the job at Brown's, he seemed to have found a home for himself. He told some of his close friends that he really enjoyed working there, and he hoped to be promoted to assistant manager someday. In fact, at the time that he was killed, he had just started training to become a manager. But instead of being promoted, the robbers ordered him into the freezer, had him kneel down, and shot him once execution style. 17-year-old Rico Solis was the one who was sweeping the floors. He was friends with Michael, and they both attended the same high school. That night, he was shot a total of 5 times. Before his death, Rico was described as a quiet, hardworking teen who was close to his family, especially his younger sister. The family was originally from the Philippines and had just moved to the U.S. that May. He worked at Brown's part-time to help his family earn a little extra money, and he got the job there because of his friend Michael. Over 150 people were said to have attended his funeral. 16-year-old Michael Castro, or Mike as he was usually called, was the youngest killed. He was shot 6 times. At the time, he was a junior in high school, and like Rico, worked at the restaurant part-time as a cashier after school and on the weekends. He was described as a good kid whose life was taken far too early and who never had a chance to reach his full potential. His parents were the first ones to call the police that night. Then there was 32-year-old Thomas Menez, or Tom. The robbers had shot him 3 times. Before that, he worked in the kitchen at the restaurant, wasn't married, and had a twin brother named Jerry. The brutality of the murders stunned everyone: the community, the country, the families of the victims, even the first responding officers who witnessed everything firsthand. 7 dead bodies spread across the restaurant's 2 walk-in freezers, each shot multiple times, all for what? A little less than $2,000 in cash? Was this a robbery? Was this a mass shooting? Was one of the victims a target here? What exactly is happening? The scene itself was messy. Right when the cops arrived, there was a bloody mop just inside the doorway from the employee entrance. There was so much blood that at first, the police weren't even sure how many victims there were. Their bodies were all entangled and so close together that it took them pulling the bodies off of one another for them to finally figure out that there were 7. Some were face down, others face up. Most of them shot multiple times while kneeling together on the floor. At the same time the bodies were being identified, the search for evidence began. Although the police explored all possibilities, from this being a targeted attack to some type of act of terrorism, the most likely motive seemed to be robbery. That's because all of the cash was missing from the unlocked and open safe in the back of the restaurant. They also didn't find any major enemies of the victims, so it didn't seem to be over something extremely personal. All the roads led back to robbery. But now the biggest concern became 2 things. 1, find these gunmen before they get away or do this somewhere else. And number 2, lock down the scene and get any potential evidence that might be able to be used to try to identify who we're looking for. By January 11th, it had been about a day and a half since the bodies were discovered, and the police were still very busy working the crime scene. One of those people was Dr. Jane Homeyer, a forensic scientist with the Northern Illinois Police Crime Lab. She was in charge of processing fingerprints and helping collect and preserve any other evidence. While going through the cash register receipts from that night, she found a receipt for a meal that was purchased at 9:08 p.m. It was a 4-piece chicken meal with fries, coleslaw, and a small drink. Not only did this meal stand out because it was the last meal of the night, but also because parts of that meal were found inside one of the trash cans. Inside the trash bin on the west side of the dining room, there was a cardboard box with pieces of chicken bones, scattered French fries, biscuits, coleslaw, and paper products, including 4 used napkins. This all lined up with what would have been left for that meal that was rung up at the register at 9:08 p.m. And it was the only meal inside the trash bin because all of the trash cans had been emptied earlier in the night as part of the closing procedures. So once it was determined they likely came from that purchase, the remaining items from the trash, including the pieces of chicken and napkins, were bagged and sent to the lab for testing. The idea was that this was the meal that the 2 gunmen sat down together and ate right before the shooting. Investigators also collected extensive trace evidence, including fibers, hair, blood, and more than 200 fingerprints. A few days later, on the 14th, the napkins were tested for fingerprints. They were put under various different lights to see if there were any latent print impressions on them. They were also each dipped into an anhydrous solution to help the prints become more visible. But after all 4 napkins were tested and dipped into the solution, only one latent print was found. So it was then photographed and put back into evidence. Then sometime later, around January 22nd or 23rd, the lab tried to use zinc chlorine to react with the lipids in the print residue to develop additional impressions on the napkin. But no other prints were developed. They just had that one. Now, besides fingerprints, the lab also looked for DNA, specifically on the chicken bones. Whoever ate the chicken, who they believed was at least one of the robbers, likely left their DNA on it through saliva. They bit into the chicken, left saliva, therefore leaving DNA, a forensic footprint that could be used to lead the police right to their suspect. But we're talking about 1993 here. DNA evidence was just starting to be used to solve crimes. It was only in the beginning stages. It was nowhere near where it is today. So even if they could collect DNA from the chicken bones, they probably couldn't do much with it. But here's what happened. The chicken bones were sent to Life Codes, a private lab. The police knew that it was well beyond their testing capabilities at the state crime lab, so they reached out to this private lab instead. But here's the problem that they ran into. The amount of DNA on the chicken bones was only about 1 to 2 nanograms. Way too small for them to do any type of meaningful testing here. Now, to put these numbers into perspective, the amount of DNA that this lab was used to testing on these types of items was about 10 nanograms. This sample was 1 to 2. So it was much, much smaller than anything they had tested before. They also weren't using short tandem repeat testing, or STR testing, which usually works well with small DNA samples. So after Life Codes examined that particular piece of chicken, they threw it away. Later on, they would say they threw it away because there wouldn't be anything you could do with it anymore. The bones had been exposed to what they described as a, quote, chemical bath. So there was no reason to keep it because it couldn't be retested. So after that, the rest of the chicken bones were returned back to the police department and put back into the evidence freezer. With virtually no other leads, no witnesses, nothing, the case eventually went cold and would remain cold for the next 9 long years. Support for this episode comes from Smart Labels. It's the new year, and whether it's your New Year's resolution to get more organized or it's just time for your annual cleanup, there's a product called Smart Labels that your future self is going to love you for getting. With their QR code labels, you can just put a label on your storage container, scan the QR code with the Smart Labels app, and then catalog everything you put in the container with a name, description, and picture. Then just let the app know where you put the container, and there you go. Whenever you need that one thing, you can just do a search in the app, and it will tell you the color of the label, the 4-character code on the label, and where you put it. Or if you're just curious about what's in a storage bin on a high shelf, just scan the QR code with the app, and it tells you everything that's inside. It's like organizing magic. So this new year, make sure you pick up a pack on Amazon by searching for Smart Labels, one word, and get ready for a huge thank you from your future self. For 9 excruciatingly long years, the Brown's Chicken Massacre continued to haunt the greater Chicago area. Could these 2 men really get away with mass murder? The answer to that question was yes, until a woman named Ann Lockett came along. In March 2002, Ann Lockett came forward with what would turn out to be very important information. She said she knew who the two gunmen were: her ex-boyfriend, James Degorski, and his friend, Juan Luna. According to Ann Lockett, after the murders happened, her then boyfriend, James, called her and told her to, quote, "watch the news tonight. I did something." That something was the Brown's Chicken Massacre. Ann told the police that James eventually told her everything. He was the one responsible, and he had help from his good friend and former high school classmate, Juan Luna. When it came to why she didn't come forward 9 years earlier, she said at the time she was dealing with both major substance abuse and mental health issues. She had tried to commit suicide on at least 2 different occasions, and she just wasn't in a good place. She also said that she was afraid of what James might do to her if she ever told anyone. So she kept everything she knew a secret for 9 long years. Ann was 17 and still in high school when she met and started dating James Degorski in 1992. They used to drink and smoke marijuana together with their mutual friend Eileen Bacala, another key witness we're going to talk about. According to Ann, on January 7th, 1993, the day before the murders, she was admitted to the hospital on a suicide attempt. And while she was in the hospital, she got a call from James telling her to watch the news. The lead story was the Brown's chicken murders. Then after she was released from the hospital on January 24th, she said she went to James's house and he asked her if she wanted to know what happened at Brown's Chicken. She said yes, she wanted to know. So that's when he proceeded to tell her everything. He said he and Juan Luna went to the Brown's Chicken together with, quote, "pockets full of bullets." James and Juan had been childhood friends and attended William Fremd High School together in Palatine, so they were close and they hung out a lot. He said they went in right around closing time, and the two of them ordered chicken, which initially made James mad because he was worried about leaving greasy fingerprints back at the crime scene. So they came up with a plan. They decided to go into the bathroom and put on latex gloves. That's also when they blocked the back entrance door with a wedge so that no one could run out once they started the robbery. Ann said that's when the men admitted shooting the victims with James's .38 caliber revolver. She even disclosed details that no one knew about, like how one of the boys who was left in the freezer had vomited French fries before he died, and how they both mopped the floor and wiped the area down to try to remove any fingerprints. Also, how afterward they cleaned up and disposed of their clothing in a dumpster and threw the gun in the Fox River. According to Ann, James threatened to kill her if she said anything and told her that because she was in the hospital at the time, he was going to use their mutual friend Eileen as an alibi if he was ever questioned. So let's talk about her. Eileen Bacala would eventually tell the police that James Degorski called and asked her to meet him and Juan Luna in the parking lot of a Jewel grocery store on the night of the murders. She was close friends with James and also knew Juan Luna. They both would go to his house and smoke marijuana together, so they were all friends at the time. Eileen said that when she met them in the parking lot, she saw James and Juan inside of Juan's car, along with latex gloves and a canvas money bag. She said they all got inside of her car, and as she drove them back to her house, they told her that they had robbed the Brown's Chicken. Once they got to her house, she said Juan and James split the money in the bag and gave her $50, which she said was a repayment for a loan that she had given James. After that, the three smoked some pot and just hung around the house for a bit before she drove Juan back to his car in the parking lot. She said that on their way there, they saw a bunch of police cars parked in front of the restaurant. So that's when she knew what they had told her was true. Then the next day, Eileen met James at a car wash where they extensively cleaned Juan's car together to get rid of any evidence. here's something else about Eileen. She never once came forward to the police about this until they approached her on May 15th, 2002. This was after they heard from her friend Anne. However, she did admit to telling her husband about it before they got married in 1998. When it comes to why they picked that particular restaurant to rob, both Anne and Eileen said it was because Juan Luna used to work there. He knew where they kept the cash, and he knew how easy it would be to get it. Anne would also say later on that James told her how Juan told him he wanted to find out what it was like to kill someone, and James, being the good friend that he was, agreed to help him find out. Now, it's important to mention here that neither Eileen nor James or Juan were strangers to the police. On November 25th, 1995, all three of them were called down to the police station and questioned about the murders. One of the reasons why they became suspects was because Juan was a former employee. He was 18 when he worked there, and he was let go. But when the cops spoke with Eileen, she told them that she was with both of these guys on the night of the murders, so they couldn't have done it, and they didn't even find out about the robbery until the next morning. So essentially, Eileen lied back in 1995 and provided a false alibi for both James and Juan. And now, 9 years later, Eileen, in exchange for her testimony, the district attorney promised her that they wouldn't prosecute her for anything related to the murders or for her lying 9 years earlier. They were more interested in going after the actual alleged murderers, Juan Luna and James Degorski. So now, Anne Lockett and Eileen Bacala become important witnesses for both the police and the prosecution. But witnesses, they're not everything. What about the forensic evidence? What did the state have as far as physical evidence goes that proves what Eileen and Anne are saying is actually true? Well, by 2002, DNA testing had come a long way since 1993. So to get the forensic evidence they needed, the police started with those chicken bones that were found in the restaurant's trash can. In June 1998, 5 years after the shooting, scientists at the Illinois State Police Science Center in Chicago began tests to look for saliva. And when the test came back, they found that there was saliva on 2 out of the 5 remaining bones. So those 2 pieces of chicken were sent for more testing. That testing was STR DNA analysis, which obtained a 9 loci DNA profile from the bones. The test also revealed that each sample contained DNA from multiple contributors, a major profile and a minor DNA profile. The major profile was consistent with someone eating the chicken, and the minor profile was consistent with someone touching it. So now, in 2002, the DNA pulled from the chicken bones was compared to a sample of Juan Luna's DNA. He had given it to the police after Eileen and Anne came forward. And the results of that comparison were a perfect match. It was Juan's DNA on the chicken bones found in the restaurant's trash cans. It had a 1 in 2.8 trillion chance of matching anyone else. Now, when it comes to the other profile, the minor DNA profile, no match was found. It didn't match James. On top of the DNA, they were also able to match the latent fingerprint found on the napkins to Juan Luna, but no fingerprints were found that matched James Degorski. So all the forensic evidence pointed toward Juan, and his friend James was just guilty by association. Both men were taken into custody on May 16, 2002, and not long after that, Juan Luna reportedly confessed to everything. His confession lined up perfectly with what Anne and Eileen had already told them. He admitted that he and James went into the Brown's Chicken restaurant just as it was closing at 9 o'clock, ordered a 4-piece chicken meal, and then forced everyone to the back where they shot and killed them. Had they not ordered that chicken meal and put their DNA all over the chicken bones, they might have never been caught. But that's not the end of the story. Sometime after Juan was arrested, his attorney claimed that he was forced into confessing, and that because his family was from Mexico, the police threatened to have all of them deported if he didn't confess. So according to his attorney, what he said wasn't true. Neither he nor James did it. Now, his friend James Degorski also reportedly confessed. He had the exact same story and said that they split the robbery money, which was about $800 each. But his attorney also tried to argue that he was forced into confessing and that he was actually innocent. Since both men were now recanting their confessions, they both decided to take their cases to trial, despite the taped confessions and despite the DNA evidence on the chicken bones. Juan's trial was first. He was now 33. Not only did his lawyers try to say that he made a false confession, but they also challenged the forensic evidence. In their arguments, they said that the bones were left out of the freezer for several days before they were tested. So, whatever DNA evidence was discovered, it couldn't be trusted. It couldn't be trusted because they had partially thawed before they were analyzed. Another argument was that when the bones were taken out, they were placed on a dirty examination table, and people touched them without wearing gloves. They also had a DNA expert testify that at least 1 million other people could share a similar DNA profile, a claim that the prosecution would argue that Juan was 234 million times more likely to be the contributor than a random person. So you'll have to decide for yourself which DNA expert that you believe. As far as a confession, Juan Luna's defense argued someone else confessed to the murders long before he did. Here's how that story goes. On August 9th, 1999, John Simonak told detectives that he and Todd Wakefield committed the murders. According to his taped police statement, which was played in front of the jury at Juan Luna's trial, he and Wakefield went to the Brown's Chicken restaurant on January 8th, 1993. Wakefield drove a brown station wagon, which he parked on the east side of the restaurant, and he and Simonak entered through the east door. He said Wakefield was the one who ordered the chicken meal. Then 5 to 10 minutes later, he pulled out a gun and told the employees to get into the freezer. As he moved back toward Wakefield, he said he heard gunshots and started to, quote, freak out. That's when he says Wakefield shot the people inside the freezer and then ordered him to shoot the people in the other one. He claims he told his friend that he didn't want to do it, but Wakefield proceeded to make him do it anyway. After the murders, this guy told the police that he felt really bad for what happened, and that's why he was now confessing. Well, John would later recant his confession, saying the police told him he wouldn't be allowed to leave and he wouldn't be allowed to make a phone call until he told them what they wanted to hear. And during this so-called confession, he told them things that he had simply read about in the newspapers. He would also make up other details. When he would say something that was incorrect or didn't match the evidence, the police would apparently say something like, "That's not what happened," and they would give him a chance to change his story or to come up with a story that actually fit. So it was pretty quickly determined that this guy had nothing to do with the murders, and neither did his friend Todd Wakefield. This was a total and complete false confession. John even testified at Juan Luna's trial, saying that he wasn't involved in the murders and that, yes, he did falsely confess. So the state's case was this. They had 2 witnesses who say Juan Luna confessed to them about the shooting. The DNA found on the chicken bones matches Juan. They found a fingerprint on the napkins from the trash can that also matches him, and he allegedly confessed after being arrested. Now, the defense's case. The DNA from the chicken might be contaminated because it was taken out of the freezer for an extended period of time. It was left on a dirty examination table. People touched the bones without wearing gloves, so therefore the DNA can't be trusted. He never truthfully confessed to anything. He lied, and someone else confessed to it long before he did. But in the end, it was the state's case that won. On May 10th, 2007, Juan Luna was found guilty of all 7 counts of murder. And 7 days later, he received his sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors assigned to the case sought the death penalty, which was available back in 2007. But the jury's vote of 11-1 in favor of the death penalty fell short. Then years later, in 2019, an action was filed by the U.S. government to revoke his naturalized citizenship, which he had received in the time between the murders and his arrest. Next up, James Degorski's trial. His trial was very similar to Juan Luna's, but with some key differences. The similarities were the witnesses and alleged confessions. But the difference was that the state had virtually no forensic evidence linking him to the murders. All the evidence found at the crime scene belonged to Juan Luna. The DNA on the chicken bone, the latent fingerprint on the napkin, all of that belonged to his co-defendant. So his defense was similar to Juan Luna's in that his lawyers argued that this John character had already confessed to the murders back in 1998, and whatever forensic evidence they had found at the crime scene didn't match. Not even a fingerprint was found on the mop handle that was apparently used by the gunman to clean up afterward. That fingerprint didn't match him. The police also never found the murder weapon. They conducted dozens of searches of the Fox River, but all of those searches turned up empty. The defense also had a lot of character witnesses who testified that James had never been violent before. Yes, he smoked marijuana and did some drugs here and there, but he wasn't known to be a violent person. So, without any forensic evidence linking him to the murders, what would the jury decide? Well, on September 29th, 2009, James Degorski was found guilty of all 7 counts of murder, just like his co-defendant. This decision was almost entirely based on the testimony of his former girlfriend, Ann Lockett, and their friend, Eileen Bacala, who both said that he confessed. His friend, Luna, also implicated him during his own confession back in 2002. So that's at least 3 people who said he was guilty, despite the lack of forensic evidence. About a month later, on October 20th, he was sentenced to life without parole. All but 2 of the jurors voted for the death penalty. 4 years later, in 2013, he appealed, but the appeal was rejected and his conviction stood. So both Juan Luna and James Degorski, former high school buddies and now convicted mass murderers, are currently serving their sentence at the same prison, Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. Juan is now 50 and James is 52. But the end of the trial and appeal didn't mean that James's problems were over. In March 2014, a jury awarded him over $400,000 in compensation and punitive damages after being beaten by a sheriff's deputy in the Cook County Jail in a May 2002 incident. He was given the money after this sheriff deputy was found guilty of fracturing his face, which he eventually required surgery for. The deputy was also fired. What happened at closing time inside that Brown's Chicken restaurant on January 8th, 1993 will forever haunt the community it happened in, and the lives of the victims' families will never be the same. Following the shooting, sales at all Brown's Chicken restaurants dropped 35% within a month, and the company eventually had to close 100 locations throughout the greater Chicago area. As of today, the original building where the massacre took place no longer exists. In its place is a Chase Bank. In the end, 7 lives were lost, over $1,800 in cash. And without the forensic evidence obtained from the discarded napkins and chicken bones, the 2 men responsible might have gotten away with it. To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much to this week's newest patrons, Bree and Jackie S. Thank you for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/forensictales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Marianne C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley S., Alice B., Danielle D., and Savannah. If you'd like to become a producer of this show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here. To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In April of 1981, the body of a young woman was found alongside a road in Troy, Ohio. She had been strangled and beaten to death, but her identity remained a mystery for almost 4 decades. It wasn't until the authorities used advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy that the girl, once known only as the Buckskin Girl, finally got a name. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 255, The Story of Buckskin Girl. April 28, 1981. The police are called about the possible discovery of a young female in a ditch on Greenlee Road in Newton Township near Troy, Ohio, a small town with less than 3,000 people. 3 young men had called saying they found the girl in the ditch, curled up in the fetal position with no shoes or socks. When the police got there, this is what they had to say. According to one of them, a guy named Greg Breidenbaugh, he first noticed a distinctive buckskin poncho lying in the ditch just off Greenlee Road. So he told one of his friends, Neil Hoffman, they should go over and have a look. But when they got close enough so that they could touch it, that's when they realized it wasn't just a piece of clothing. Later that same day, the girl was taken for an autopsy. And this is really where the mystery of this story begins. You didn't even have to perform one to know that this was a murder. Without even cutting into her body, you could see the visible injuries to her head and face. She very clearly suffered a violent death before ending up in that roadside ditch. But here's what the autopsy did find. Based on the condition of her body, the medical examiner theorized that she was probably killed less than 48 hours before being discovered. And on top of blunt force trauma, she had also been strangled to death. She had bruising covering most of her neck and petechia, or tiny blood spots, in both of her eyes. But here's one of the many strange parts. She had a lacerated liver that no one could quite explain why or how that happened. There were also no signs of a sexual assault. This girl had suffered a very brutal death. Blunt force trauma to the face and head. She'd been strangled, her liver lacerated. But now the question became, who was she? Besides the clothes that she wore on her back, she had nothing on her. No wallet, no purse, no ID, nothing. So the only thing they had to work with was what she looked like. She was somewhere between 5'4" and 5'6" tall, weighed about 125 to 130 pounds. She looked like she could be anywhere from 18 to 26 years old. She had naturally reddish-brown hair, parted down the middle and braided into pigtails. Her eyes were light brown and she had freckles. Some of the other notable features were a, quote, very pointed nose and a skin complexion that looked like she had spent a lot of time outdoors in the final weeks of her life. Another thing that stood out about this girl was that she was well cared for. She took good care of herself, she was clean, and all of her teeth, including her wisdom teeth, were in great condition and showed no signs of major dental work. The only thing she had was one porcelain crown. Sometimes a person's teeth can tell a lot about a person. If they're well taken care of, then maybe this person is connected somewhere. They have the financial means and the financial resources to go to the dentist. And if they're not, then maybe this young girl could be some type of runaway. Now, that's not always the case, but in this situation, they felt pretty confident. Now, besides her teeth, the medical examiner also noted a couple of scars and marks on her body. She had a scar on her chin and several smaller ones on one of her wrists, both of her arms, and on one of her ankles. But all of the scars and the marks were old, so there was no way of knowing how she got them. On top of her physical appearance, the authorities also had what she was wearing: a pair of blue bell-bottom Wrangler jeans, a brown turtleneck pullover sweater with an orange crisscross design on the front of it, a white bra, and a hoodless deerskin poncho with purple lining. Now, the poncho was something that really stood out to investigators. Remember, this was the first thing that those three boys discovered her. They saw it lying in the ditch, just the poncho, and they went over to go take a look at it. It was a very distinctive and almost looked like it could be handmade. It didn't look like something that you could just drive down to the store and buy. Once the authorities knew they had a homicide on their hands, they got to work trying to identify her. The first thing they did was take her fingerprints and get an impression of her teeth. The hope was they could match the prints or her dental impressions to someone in the missing person database. But no luck there. Her dental records didn't match anyone in the system, and her fingerprints didn't match any police reports, suggesting that she had never been arrested before. Or, if she had been arrested, she wasn't required to submit her fingerprints, so they weren't there. At first, the authorities thought this young girl would be identified pretty quickly. Surely someone out there had to be missing her. a mom, dad, friend, someone. And it would just be a matter of a couple of days before someone came forward looking for this girl. But that simply didn't happen. The days turned to weeks, and then eventually months passed, and not one single person came to identify her. So after the dental impressions and the fingerprints failed, that's when they turned to a forensic sketch artist to help create a photo of how she might have looked before she was killed. And once they had the composite sketch, they published it everywhere. Local newspapers, television networks in the area, anywhere and everywhere they could possibly think of. After the photo aired on television on April 28, 1981, the police got a lot of tips. Over 200 people called into the police department saying that they thought they might know who she was. So one by one, very tediously, the police investigated all 200 tips. But all of them turned out to be a dead end in one way or another. As the tips dried up and interest in the case began to fade, the girl got her nickname, Buckskin Girl. That's because of the distinctive tasseled buckskin jacket she was wearing when her body was first discovered. That was it. No first name, no last name. She was just Buckskin Girl. But even though they couldn't identify her, the authorities weren't short on coming up with possible theories. One idea was that she probably wasn't from the area. This became a popular theory for a couple of reasons. One, that would explain why no one came forward looking for her. If she wasn't from there, then that probably meant that the people who were looking for her weren't anywhere nearby. They probably lived all the way across the country, and they were out there looking for her. They had no idea that she ended up in Troy, Ohio. It's possible that she didn't even have any connections to that part of the country. And number two, her body was found in a very remote location. She probably didn't have any business even being out there. So the police wondered if she could be from somewhere else. Another theory related to that one was that she was probably murdered elsewhere and then her body was just dumped there. That's because there was no other evidence around her body suggesting that that's where she was killed. That theory could also explain why she was missing her shoes and socks. If she was killed somewhere else and had her body dumped in that particular ditch, she might have lost them somewhere along the way. Then there was this. At the autopsy, her bare feet were completely clean. They didn't have a single spot of dirt on them, which again supports this theory that she was killed somewhere else before her body was dumped. You also have to consider the location of the dump site itself. Interstate 75 is 5 miles away from where her body was found, making that particular spot a really good spot for someone to discreetly dump a body after you just killed her. No one would have even seen it happen. The police also consider the possibility that a Buckskin Girl might be a runaway or some type of transient. She could have also been hitchhiking her way somewhere when someone picked her up and killed her. But the bigger rumors and the bigger theories were that her case could be connected to others. For a while, the authorities speculated whether there was a possible connection between Buckskin Girl's murder and the murder of a 27-year-old woman just 2 months earlier in February of 1981. But the police never found any credible evidence suggesting that they were actually related. The only thing they seemed to have in common was that both of the victims were young females. But other than that, there was nothing. Now came the rumors about a serial killer. By 1985, the police thought that Buckskin Girl's murder might be linked to a nationwide series of murders of young white females, many of which were either sex workers or exotic dancers, all known collectively as the Redhead murders. Here's how that story goes. During the late 1970s and 1990s, a lot of young women with red hair were discovered dead along major highways across the states of Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And a lot of them even remained unidentified for years. But even to this day, we don't know how many actual victims there are because the person responsible hasn't been caught. The actual number of victims could be as low as 5 or as many as 14. We just don't know. But the victims we do know about include 28-year-old Lisa Nichols, 21-year-old Tina Farmer, 15-year-old Tracy Walker, 23-year-old Michelle Inman, and 28-year-old S.B. Pilgrim. On top of not knowing how many redhead murder victims there really are, we also don't know if the same person is even responsible for all of the murders or not. Maybe it's just pure coincidence that these victims have red hair and their bodies are being dumped along major state highways, but they've all been committed by different people. Or at least a couple different people, and the same person didn't do all of them. But when it came to Buckskin Girl, the authorities wondered if she could be one of the victims. Here's why. She had reddish-brown hair, and of course, her body was discovered just off a major state highway. So at first glance, it seemed to check off all the boxes. But no evidence ever surfaced linking her to the other redhead murders. And just like I mentioned, the suspect's never been caught. He's also sometimes been called the Bible Belt Strangler, because the area where the bodies were found, at least most of them, are a part of the Bible Belt. But we still don't know who he is. The Bible Belt Strangler isn't the only serial killer that the police thought about. They also wondered if an unidentified serial killer who was active between 1985 and 2004 may have also been responsible. Here's why. This particular serial killer targeted known and suspected sex workers, and all of the victims had been murdered by either being bludgeoned to death or strangled, just like Buckskin Girl. Something else unique about his crimes was that he usually stole some of their clothing or their jewelry right after he killed them. Now, of course, this particular detail really piqued the attention of investigators. Buckskin Girl, as we know, was missing her shoes and some of her jewelry. So far, we've got 2 boxes checked. 1, Buckskin Girl was strangled and bludgeoned to death. And box number 2, she was missing her shoes, socks, and some of her jewelry. But other parts of it didn't match, like how this serial killer only targeted known and suspected sex workers. There was absolutely zero evidence suggesting that Buckskin Girl had ever worked as a sex worker of any kind. She showed no signs of sexual assault or really any signs that she had recently engaged in any type of sexual activity. And unlike most of this serial killer's victims, she was very well groomed and taken care of, something that all of the other victims of this unknown serial killer were not. Without any more leads, the police had no choice but to bury Buckskin Girl without a name. Even many of the police officers who worked the case became pallbearers at her memorial service. For them, it had become a case they just couldn't forget about. Who was this girl, and who killed her? By 1991, 10 years had passed, and investigators were still no closer to getting any solid answers. But things were slowly starting to look up. A newly established task force in London, Ohio, was created to help solve some of the area's cold cases, including this one. Not only were they looking at cases from the state of Ohio, but they also had lists from New York, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. It was the first big move in the case in practically a decade. But here comes the bad news. Despite the group's best efforts, nothing new was learned about who Buckskin Girl really was. She was still nameless and her murder unsolved. Fast forward another decade, the case is still cold. At this point, people started to wonder if Buckskin Girl might have known her killer. Since there was no evidence of sexual assault, This led some to wonder if this was some type of domestic crime. Maybe a boyfriend, maybe a husband had done this to her. It could also explain why no one came forward to identify her. If a boyfriend or a husband was really all that she had, and they were the ones who did this, then maybe that's why no one came forward looking for her. By 2001, there was another breakthrough. By then, DNA testing had become more and more common in criminal investigations, and this case was no different. The authorities were able to extract some of the girl's DNA from the blood sample taken during her autopsy back in 1981. And once they had the DNA, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab generated a DNA profile of Buckskin Girl and uploaded it to the newly established National Missing Unidentified Person System, or NamUs, in 2008. They partnered with the University of North Texas to generate the DNA profile and upload it to NamUs, becoming one of the first people entered into the university's database. So now, her fingerprints, dental records, and DNA are all nationally accessible to law enforcement agencies all across the country. If any department had the same profile and uploaded it to NamUs for comparison, then they could finally get a match. But an exact match never happened. Although this was still considered a major step forward in the investigation. That's because since Buckskin Girl's DNA profile was uploaded to NamUs, the police could officially rule out 226 missing teenage girls and young women as being her. So just because they weren't able to get an exact match didn't mean that all of this was for nothing. They were able to rule out hundreds, 226 other girls, and this allowed them to keep moving forward. By the following year, 2009, a mitochondrial DNA sample was submitted to the FBI to be uploaded to CODIS, the National DNA Database. But unfortunately, there were no immediate hits there either. Then less than a year later, NamUs's case management department assigned Buckskin Girl's case to Elizabeth Murray, a forensic anthropologist from Cincinnati. She was being tasked with trying to identify her based on where she was originally from. Now it's April of 2016, a full 35 years since Buckskin Girl was first discovered. And by this point, we might be getting close to finding out who she was. In April of 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released 2 versions of an updated forensic facial reconstruction. They were put up on their website and distributed to the media. One of these images showed a young girl with freckles all across her face, and her reddish-brown hair tied in 2 pigtails. The other one looked almost identical, it just didn't have the 2 pigtails. The hope again would be that someone would come forward and say they recognized her. But nothing significant came from these new forensic facial reconstructions. Later that year, things started to heat up again, this time involving lesser-known forensic techniques. The first were pollen tests. In late 2016, the Miami County Sheriff's Office approved forensic pollenology testing to study the pollen on her clothes. It works like this. Scientists examine someone's clothing or their body to see if they have any pollen. And based on the type of pollen they find, they can sometimes determine where they're geographically from or where they've spent time right before they died. This can be really useful because, 1, pollen is highly resistant to decomposition, which means that it can quite literally last thousands, if not millions of years. And number 2, it's microscopic and not visible to the naked eye. So pollen is easily trapped in surfaces, which again makes it stick to clothing for a long, long time. In Buckskin Girl's case, detectives hoped that they could find pollen on her clothing to help figure out where she lived because they already suspected that she wasn't from the Troy, Ohio area. They just had no idea where she was from. So in 2016, the testing on her clothes was done by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency. And here's what they found. The pollen suggested that she had spent time in an arid climate, like the southwestern part of the United States or northern Mexico right before she died. Also interesting, the tests revealed that her clothing had high levels of soot exposure similar to high traffic areas or industrial activity, like maybe she traveled through a densely populated urban area. But testing the pollen on her clothes wasn't the only thing that they did. They also performed isotope tests on her hair and her nails, another lesser-known forensic technique. This process is similar to looking at the pollen because scientists can study someone's hair or their nails to figure out things like what a person's diet looks like, what their lifestyle was, or where they're geographically from. So in Buckskin Girl's case, the thing investigators were most interested in finding was where she was originally from or where she was born. So after looking at her hair and nails, scientists determined that she was likely born somewhere in the northwestern part of the United States, and that's where she spent most of her childhood. The test also revealed that she had spent time in northern Texas at least twice during the year right before her death. So now, with all of this geographical information, investigators started to draw some conclusions about her. Number one, this confirmed their earlier suspicions that she was living life somewhat as a transient before she was killed. She may have even been a habitual hitchhiker, and that explains why she was found where she was. And two, this information just served as further confirmation that she wasn't from the area, and that's why no one came to identify her. Now, all of this was very helpful to investigators, and it was information they didn't previously have. But it still didn't say who she was. She was still just Buckskin Girl. So 2 years later, 2018, her case was submitted to the DNA Doe Project, an American nonprofit volunteer organization formed to identify unidentified deceased people using forensic genealogy. They started working on the case by submitting Buckskin Girl's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a free DNA database, to see maybe if they could find any of her relatives. Now, before I go on, in case anyone is new to this show, forensic genetic genealogy uses DNA analysis and genealogy to help law enforcement agencies either solve crimes or help identify missing or unidentified people. It usually works by uploading unknown DNA to publicly accessible databases like GEDmatch and 23andMe to identify relatives of the unknown person. From there, law enforcement can create family trees of people related to the person that they're searching for. This is the same type of DNA testing that eventually caught the Golden State Killer several years back. And ever since then, police departments have used it to help solve cold cases and help identify previously unidentified people, just like Buckskin Girl. So in 2018, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab, the DNA Doe Project, and another private corporation called the Full Genomes Corporation all worked together on the same team and uploaded her DNA profile to GEDmatch. And within just 4 hours of researching, they found out who Buckskin Girl really was. They matched her DNA to the DNA of one of her first cousins, solving an over 3-decade mystery. On April 9th, 2018, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab held a press conference announcing that Buckskin Girl had finally been identified as 21-year-old Marcia King of Little Rock, Arkansas. Just a note here, Some reports report her name as Marcia, while most of the other reports remark it as Marcia. So for the sake of this episode or the rest of it, we'll use Marcia. Now here's everything that we know about her. According to family, Marcia was last seen sometime in 1980. She was born on June 9th, 1959 in Arkansas and regularly hitchhiked before her disappearance. After she left home back in 1980, her family says they never saw or heard from her again. Even though her family continued to search for her for years, Marcia was never officially reported as a missing person. Almost 2 years later, in February of 2020, the police announced that after more investigating, they determined that Marcia King frequently hitchhiked in the months leading up to her death. They believed that she used it as a primary way of transportation. She had ties to both Pittsburgh and Louisville, Kentucky, but had no known ties to Troy, Ohio. Their best guess is that she might have been traveling to Ohio to attend a religious event for the Way, a non-denominational Christian ministry group based in New Knoxville, Ohio, although that's never been confirmed. They also have eyewitness reports who said that they saw Marcia in Louisville, Kentucky about 14 days before her death. But other than that little bit of information, very little is known about her or her last days alive or who she spent it with. Could she have been murdered by someone that she knew, or at least someone that she was involved with? Or could it just have been someone who offered her a ride, a complete stranger? There are so many people who played a part in Marcia's identification. The original detectives, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab, the DNA Doe Project, the Miami County Coroner Office, the Miami County Sheriff's Office, the Full Genomes Corporation, countless volunteers, and that's just to name a few. Over the last 3 decades, hundreds, if not thousands of people worked this case in some way or another. And without forensic genetic genealogy and advanced DNA testing, we still might not know the true identity behind Buckskin Girl. But thanks to forensic science, we now know her as Marcia King. As of today, the investigation has shifted. We now must figure out who's responsible for this brutal murder. However, according to the latest articles about the case, the police don't have any viable suspects or persons of interest at this time. But that doesn't mean this is the end of the road. Forensic science was used to identify her, and I think it can also be used to catch her killer. In February 2020, the same time that the police announced more about Marcia's whereabouts before her murder, they also said that hair collected at the crime scene just might be the key to identifying her killer. Advancements in technology now mean that nuclear DNA samples can be retrieved from hair samples that are missing the actual root. So all the hair collected back at the crime scene, including ones without the root, was now uploaded into CODIS. This essentially means that someday, somewhere down the line, those hair samples, again, even without the root, could be used to identify a promising suspect, or at least tell us who Marcia might have been spending time with right before she was killed. But as of right now, in November of 2024, the hair collected from the crime scene and uploaded to CODIS hasn't resulted in any suspects or arrests yet. But it could just be a matter of time before we get that fresh new tip. Addressing this latest announcement, the Miami County Sheriff told reporters, quote, "We always have hope to bring justice for homicide victims and their families. We never have, nor we will ever forget, and will continually work the case, and as new technologies are developed, we'll review our evidence to learn if it is worth resubmitting," end quote. For Marcia's family, her identification is still just the first step. and the police say Marcia's mother lived in the same house for over 37 years, didn't change her phone number, simply in the hope that her daughter would someday come home. Weeks after her discovery, Marcia was buried as a Jane Doe at Riverside Cemetery in Miami County, Ohio. But since she's been identified, her family has chosen to keep her there, with her stepmom saying, quote, "This is Cindy Sussaman," quote, "It's her family's belief that it had been God's plan for her to be murdered and to remain unidentified for so long. They believed Marcia was blessed to have died within a community which has shown such consideration and dignity to her while she remained unidentified," end quote. She also described her stepdaughter as a, quote, "very trusting young woman," end quote. On July 20th, 2018, a memorial service was held for Marcia King in Troy, Ohio. At the service, her stepmother and 8 surviving family members replaced the headstone, simply reading Jane Doe, with a headstone with the name Marcia King on it. Anyone with information about the case is asked to submit a tip on the Ohio Attorney General's website. You can also submit information on the Miami County Sheriff's Office website. To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about this case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love this show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/forensictales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Brian W., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Marianne C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley S., Alice B., Danielle D., and Savannah. If you'd like to become a producer of this show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.